May 7th, 1929. 11:38 p.m. The Plantation Roadhouse, Burnham, Illinois. The chandeliers cast golden light across 30 of Chicago's most dangerous men. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter echoed off mahogany walls. And at the head of a banquet table draped in white linen, Al Capone raised his wine glass and smiled at three men who had no idea they were about to die. Albert Anselmi, John Scalise, Joseph Giunta, the murder twins and the president of the Unione Siciliana, Capone's most trusted killers, his inner circle, his brothers in blood. Tonight, they were guests of honor. Capone had spared no expense. Lobster from Maine, steak from Kansas City, wine from a cellar that cost more than most men earned in a decade. He moved through the room like a generous king, touching shoulders, whispering jokes, making every man feel like family. But one of Capone's men noticed something the others missed. Capone's smile never reached his eyes. And leaning against the wall behind Capone's chair was a baseball bat wrapped in red ribbon. A gift, someone said. Nobody asked what kind of gift required a bat. At 11:30, the waiters cleared the dessert plates. Capone stood. The room fell silent. To loyalty, he said, raising his glass. To brotherhood. To the men who stand beside us when the bullets fly. Every man drank. Scalise and Anselmi drank deepest of all. Relieved. Convinced their secret was safe. They were wrong. Capone set down his glass. His smile vanished. And when he spoke again, his voice was ice. I know what you did. I know about Aiello's money. I know about the contract on my life. Scalise's face went white. Anselmi's hand moved toward his waistband, but four men were already behind him, pinning his arms. Giunta tried to run. He made it 3 steps. Capone picked up the baseball bat, unwrapped the ribbon slowly, and looked at the 3 men now bound to their chairs. You wanted to kill me, he said quietly. You took $50,000 to put me in the ground. He tested the bat's weight in his hands. Let me show you what that buys you. What nobody in that room understood, what even the men about to die had not grasped, was that Capone had discovered their betrayal 3 weeks earlier. And in those 3 weeks, he had not simply planned their deaths. He had orchestrated something that would make every crime family in America afraid to ever challenge Chicago again. To understand what happened in that roadhouse, you need to understand the war that had been raging for 2 years. And you need to understand the man who started it, Giuseppe Aiello, Joe to his enemies. And by 1929, everyone in Chicago was his enemy. Aiello was Sicilian old guard, a baker's son who built an empire selling sugar to bootleggers and dreamed of controlling the Unione Siciliana, the most powerful Italian-American organization in the city. There was just one problem: Al Capone. Capone was not Sicilian. He was Neapolitan, an outsider, and Aiello believed outsiders had no business running Chicago. So in 1927, Aiello declared war. Not with guns, not at first. Aiello was patient, calculating. He understood that Capone surrounded himself with killers, that a direct assault would fail. So he tried something different. He tried poison. Aiello offered the chef at Diamond Joe Esposito's Bella Napoli Cafe $35,000 to put prussic acid in Capone's soup. The chef took the money, walked straight to Capone's headquarters, and handed over every dime. 3 days later, Aiello's bakery on West Division Street was ventilated with 200 machine gun rounds. His brother Antonio caught a bullet in the shoulder. But Aiello did not stop. He sent hitmen from Cleveland, from Detroit, from New York. He offered $10,000, then $25,000, then $50,000 to anyone who could put Capone in the ground. 10 gunmen tried to collect that bounty. All 10 ended up dead. Capone retaliated by killing 2 more Aiello brothers, Robert and Frank, gunned down on a November night in 1927. The message was clear. You come for me, I come for your blood. But Aiello had learned something from those early failures. He learned that Capone's greatest strength was also his greatest weakness: trust. The Capone organization was built on blood, not just spilled blood, but shared blood. Al's brother Ralph ran the beverage operations. His cousins, the Fischetti brothers, Charles, Rocco, and Joseph, had come from Brooklyn to serve as drivers and bodyguards. His deadliest enforcers had been with him since the gang wars began. These were not hired guns. They were family. And family, in Capone's world, was sacred and untouchable. So Aiello decided to buy that family. $50,000. That was the price he put on Capone's head. Enough money to make any man reconsider his loyalties. Enough money to turn brother against brother. In the summer of 1926, Capone received a message he would never forget. His personal driver had been found on a roadside outside Chicago. The man had been killed, but not quickly. Someone had taken their time, extracting information about Capone's movements, his routines, his vulnerabilities. The hit was attributed to the North Side gang under Jaime Weiss, but Capone's informants told him something else. Aiello had been feeding information to Capone's enemies for months, details that only someone inside the organization could have provided. Capone retaliated against the North Siders by killing Weiss that October. But the question lingered. Who inside his organization was talking? Who had betrayed his trust? That question consumed him for years. He trusted no one completely except the men who had proven themselves in blood. Men like the two Sicilian killers who had been with him since the O'Banion days. Men like the ambitious young president of the Unione Siciliana. He did not know it yet, but those three men were already plotting to put him in the ground. Albert Anselmi and John Scalise were not ordinary killers. They were artists of death. Sicilian imports who had learned their trade in the old country and perfected it on Chicago's bloody streets. The newspapers called them the Murder Twins. The underworld simply called them untouchable. Their resume read like a history of Chicago's gang wars. November 1924. They walked into Dean O'Banion's flower shop on North State Street and put 3 bullets in the North Side boss while he arranged chrysanthemums. They had killed police officers and walked free when witnesses suddenly forgot what they had seen. They were suspected of being among the shooters in the St. Valentine's Day massacre, though nothing was ever proven. For years, these men had been Capone's most reliable weapons. When Capone needed someone dead, he called the Murder Twins. When Capone needed protection, Anselmi and Scalise stood at his side. They had taken bullets meant for him. They had buried bodies for him. They were, by any measure, family. Joseph Giunta was different, younger, more ambitious. He had risen through the Unione Siciliana to become its president, a position that gave him power over thousands of Sicilian immigrants and access to political connections that even Capone envied. Giunta smiled easily and spoke softly, but behind those gentle eyes was a hunger that could never be satisfied. These 3 men found each other in the winter of 1929. They shared a secret resentment, a belief that they deserved more than Capone was giving them. And when Aiello's $50,000 bounty reached their ears, resentment became an opportunity. The Murder Twins thought they were being clever. They thought Capone was too focused on Aiello to notice what was happening under his own roof. They were wrong. Every conversation they had, every meeting with Aiello's men, every whispered plan, Capone knew. His network of informants stretched from the shoeshine boys at the Congress Hotel to the bartenders in every speakeasy on the South Side. And one of those informants had been in the room when Scalise accepted Aiello's money. But Capone needed proof his lieutenants would believe, so he set a trap. One evening in April, Capone staged an argument with his bodyguard Frankie Rio. Voices raised, accusations flew. Capone slapped Rio hard across the face in front of a dozen witnesses, including Scalise and Anselmi. Rio stormed out, humiliated. 3 days later, Scalise approached Rio at a South Side bar. "We know how you feel," Scalise said, sliding into the booth. Capone treats us all like dogs. But there is another way. Aiello is paying 50,000 for the big man's head. Join us. When it is done, you will be rich. We all will. Rio listened. He nodded. He shook hands. Then he went straight to Capone and told him everything. The look on Capone's face when he heard the names was something Rio never forgot. Not rage. Something colder. Something that made Rio grateful he had chosen the right side. Capone could have killed them that night. One phone call, and Scalise, Anselmi, and Junta would vanish into Lake Michigan. But that was not enough. Not after what they had done. Not after what Aiello had done to his family. Capone wanted something more. He wanted a message so loud that every crime boss from New York to California would hear it. The invitations arrived on May 5th, cream-colored cards with gold lettering, hand-delivered by Capone's personal messengers, a celebration dinner honoring 3 pillars of the organization, Albert Anselmi, John Scalise, Joseph Junta, for their years of loyal service. When Scalise read the invitation, his hands trembled slightly. He showed it to Anselmi, who studied the words like a man searching for hidden poison. "It is a trick," Anselmi said. "Or it is exactly what it says." Scalise replied, "Capone suspects nothing. This is proof." Junta was the most confident of the 3. He had dined with Capone a dozen times. He understood the traditions. In the old country, when a boss honored his men, it meant they had risen in his estimation. It meant trust. It meant opportunity. They decided to attend. The Plantation Roadhouse sat just outside Chicago in Burnham, Illinois, a sprawling establishment where Capone conducted business away from prying eyes. On the evening of May 7th, the 3 guests of honor arrived in a black Cadillac, dressed in their finest suits, ready to accept the tribute they believed they deserved. What they found inside took their breath away. Crystal chandeliers bathed the main hall in amber light. A jazz quartet played softly in the corner, trumpet notes floating through air thick with Cuban cigar smoke. 30 of Chicago's most powerful men filled the room, soldiers and lieutenants and underbosses, all gathered to witness the honoring of the murder twins and their ambitious friend. The table was set for royalty, lobster tails glistening with butter, steaks the size of dinner plates, bottles of wine that cost more than a working man earned in 6 months, silver cutlery heavy enough to feel important in the hand. Capone himself greeted them at the door. He embraced each man, kissed their cheeks, called them brothers. His smile was wide and warm. His eyes sparkled with what looked like genuine affection. "Tonight," Capone announced to the room, "we honor 3 men who have given everything to this family. 3 men whose loyalty has never wavered." The traitors beamed. They shook hands with men who secretly despised them. They accepted toasts from soldiers who knew exactly what was coming. They ate and drank and laughed, never noticing the baseball bat wrapped in ribbon leaning against Capone's chair. At 11:30 p.m., the waiters cleared the dessert plates. Capone stood and raised his glass. "To loyalty," he said. Every man in the room raised their glasses. Scalise, Anselmi, and Junta drank deeply. They had no idea they had just toasted to their own deaths. The room fell silent as Capone set down his glass. The jazz quartet stopped mid-note. 30 men held their breath. Capone's smile faded like the last light of a winter sun. "I want to tell you a story," he said, his voice soft but carrying to every corner. "A story about loyalty, about brotherhood, about what happens when men forget where their bread comes from." Scalise shifted in his chair. Anselmi's hand drifted toward his waistband. Junta's face remained frozen in a politician's smile, though his eyes had gone cold. "Years ago," Capone continued, "someone fed information to my enemies, information that led to the torture and murder of one of my men." He let the words hang in the air. "I spent years trying to find the traitor. Years wondering who I could trust. And then, 3 weeks ago, I finally discovered something that broke my heart. Capone turned to face the 3 guests of honor. You, my brothers, my most trusted men. You took Aiello's $50,000. You planned to put a bullet in my head. You betrayed everything we built together. Scalise jumped to his feet. Al, this is a mistake. We would never. 4 men materialized behind him, forcing him back into his chair. The same happened to Anselmi and Junta. Ropes appeared. Within seconds, all 3 were bound tight. Capone walked slowly to his chair and picked up the baseball bat. He unwrapped the ribbon with the care of a man opening a Christmas gift. You know what the old-timers in Sicily used to say? Capone asked, testing the bat's weight. They said a boss should never let others do what he is not willing to do himself. Anselmi spat at Capone's feet. You Neapolitan pig. You were never one of us. Capone smiled. It was the most terrifying expression anyone in that room had ever seen. What happened next would become legend. Some say Capone himself delivered the first blow. Others say he handed the bat to a young enforcer named Tony Accardo, who earned the nickname Joe Batters that very night. The men who were there never told the same story twice, but everyone agreed on what followed. The punishment was swift and brutal. Some witnesses looked away, others watched. Understanding this was a test. To flinch was to invite suspicion. To watch was to prove loyalty. This was not cruelty. This was justice. This was what happened when you betrayed blood. What followed seemed to last forever. When it was over, the 3 traitors were barely conscious. Finish it, Capone said quietly. 3 gunshots echoed through the hall. It was over. This, Capone said into the ringing silence, is what happens to rats. Remember that. Tell your friends. Tell your enemies. Tell everyone. The bodies were loaded into a car and driven to a lonely road near Hammond, Indiana, where they were dumped before dawn. When the coroner examined them the next morning, he made a statement that would be repeated for decades. I have never seen such disfigured bodies. By dawn, every gangster in Chicago knew what had happened at the plantation. By noon, the news had reached New York. And by the end of the week, something unprecedented would happen. The most powerful crime bosses in America would gather to discuss one question. What do we do about Al Capone? 6 days after the bodies were found, the most powerful criminals in America gathered at the President Hotel in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky came from New York. Frank Costello, Nucky Johnson, and crime lords from Boston to Kansas City filled the conference room. The official purpose was to discuss the future of organized crime in America. The real purpose was to discuss one man, Al Capone. The St. Valentine's Day massacre had brought heat on everyone. Federal agents were asking questions. Newspapers were demanding action. And now this business with the baseball bat had reminded every boss in America what Capone was capable of. He is out of control, Luciano said. The attention he brings threatens all of us. But no one suggested moving against him. No one dared. They had seen what happened to Joe Aiello's hitmen. They had heard about the 3 bodies found in Hammond. They understood that challenging Capone meant war, and war with the Chicago outfit meant destruction. The discussion shifted from how to stop Capone to how to appease him. They asked him to lower his profile, take a short prison sentence on a minor charge, let the heat die down. Capone agreed. Within days, he was arrested in Philadelphia for carrying a concealed weapon. He would serve 10 months, a vacation compared to what his enemies received. But the real decision came later, in a private conversation that was never officially recorded. Chicago was off limits. The outfit was not to be challenged. Anyone who wanted to do business in Capone's city would do it on Capone's terms or not at all. And Joe Aiello, the man who had started this war with his $50,000 bounty, the New York bosses sent him a message. You are on your own. For the first time in American criminal history, an entire city belonged to one man. Joe Aiello lasted 17 months after the Atlantic City Conference. 17 months of hiding. 17 months of watching his allies abandon him one by one. 17 months of knowing that every shadow could contain his death. On October 23, 1930, Aiello stepped out of an apartment building on North Colmar Avenue. He never made it to his car. Machine gun fire erupted from 2 directions. Aiello was hit 59 times. He died on the sidewalk. When the Chicago Tribune reported his death, they called him the toughest gangster in Chicago. But tough means nothing when you stand alone against an empire. Capone had won. Completely. Absolutely. The Fischetti brothers, Capone's cousins who had stood beside him through the gang wars, went on to become powers in their own right. Rocco attended the Havana Conference in 1946 alongside Lucky Luciano and Frank Sinatra, still carrying the lessons he had learned 17 years earlier. Family above all, loyalty above all, and betrayal means death. Capone himself fell not to bullets, but to accountants. Tax evasion charges sent him to prison in 1931. He died in 1947. His mind destroyed by syphilis, a shadow of the king he had once been. But the message he sent that night in Burnham lived on for generations. Al Capone proved something that most people miss. Power is not about money or guns. It is about making sure that when you move against someone, you move so decisively, so completely, that no one ever dares try again. Aiello put a $50,000 bounty on Capone's head. He ended up riddled with 59 bullets on a Chicago street. The traitors took Aiello's money and plotted Capone's death. They ended up beaten beyond recognition on an Indiana roadside. And the 5 families, the most powerful criminal organization in America. They left Chicago and never came back. May 7th, 1929, 11:38 p.m. The Plantation Roadhouse. Al Capone set down his baseball bat, lit a cigar, and smiled. He had just sent a message that would echo through criminal history forever. You do not betray the family. You do not touch the family. And if you try, you will not just die. You will become a lesson.